Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Development Discourse, where we ideate for Africa's development. My name is Patrick Okigbo, founder Nextier. Nextier is a multi-competency advisory firm focused on helping to address the complex development challenges we face on the continent. Different scholars posit different explanations for why nations fail. In fact, this year's Nobel laureates, Darren Acemoglu, Robinson, and Johnson, situate their prognoses on the type of institutions in a country. Several other scholars diagnose issues ranging from colonialism to conflict, geography to geopolitics, malaria load to maladministration. We've read the books and papers, and often they appear to sound like the proverbial 12 blind men trying to describe an elephant. My guest today has something to say on the subject. He's assembled a team of 12 scholars and practitioners to discuss the challenges of developing public policy that advances society. The team, which includes economists, former central bankers, a serving president of Africa's Export-Import Bank, management consultants, etc., present the perspective from the emerging world or the global south. They investigated the issue through the framing of principal agent interest. The book is titled Public Policy and Agent Interest, Perspectives from the Emerging World. This is a copy of the book. It's an excellent read. My guest, Dr. Shamsuddeen Umsan, CON OFR, is an economist, banker, technocrat, and public servant. He is currently the CEO of Sussman and Associates, an economic, financial, and management consulting firm. He's a two-time minister of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, first as Minister of Finance and later as the Minister of National Planning. During his tenure, Nigeria developed the Vision 2020 document. We'll get to that later in our conversation. Dr. Umsan is the chairman of Citibank Nigeria Limited and several other private sector companies. He's also the chairman of Nigeria's Ministry of Finance Incorporated, the government agency responsible for managing Nigeria's federal government's investment portfolio, and several other government entities. Dr. Umsan, welcome.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you all of our audience. It's my pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. It's not often that we find African public officials write books about their experiences in government or continue to seek ways to contribute to scholarship. So, especially after they leave office. So for that, we're really thankful for this book. But if you can help us unpack, what's the core thesis of the book?
First of all, I think I was very reluctant to write after leaving office, especially immediately after. I left office as Minister of National Planning in 2013. At that time, things were very raw. And my initial attempt to write, or thought of writing, was really to write a book that revealed all. And it turned out, after a lot of reflection, I said, look, if you do that, all you will get is a lot of controversy. People will even go to the media and turn things around and make you the devil, rather. So at the end of the day, luckily, I allowed time to pass after several years. And I was inspired, to be honest with you, by a sermon that an imam gave at a Friday prayer about 2 years ago, where he said it's the obligation of people who have held public office, especially if they've held it well and left it without any blemish, to write their experiences so as to benefit the younger generation, particularly with public service. There are a lot of aspiring young people in the private sector, especially, who are wondering, is this something I really want to do? They are boosted by nationalism. They want to help the country, but they look at the risks and say, is this something that I should venture into? So I thought, let me document my experience, especially from the point of view of not really revealing anything, but more assessing my tenure and other people's experiences and what are the learning points, both for people who are still in government and those who are aspiring to come into government. I think that was sort of the background. Now, the main theme of the book is, according to the title, Public Policy and Agent Interest. The agency problem in economics and political economy simply says that under normal circumstances, going back to some of the Greek philosophers, government, people who are in government as officials are supposed to be agents of the public, of the ordinary citizen. So whatever action they take should be in the interest of the ordinary citizen. So who is their principal? The ordinary citizen is the principal and they are the agents. Now, what this book looks at and tries to analyze is that we have not made much significant progress in Nigeria because simply that relationship, the agency relationship where the public servant is the agent and the citizen is the principal, has broken down, whereby, you know, and usually there is a sort of expectation of each party. You know, the agent is supposed to serve in the public interest, and the principal is also supposed to undertake certain actions. One of the key ones is payment of taxes and good behavior as a citizen, obeying the law, and so on. Now, in Nigeria, that relationship has broken down. The social contract between public officials and the people they are supposed to serve is broken down, such that it's almost the reverse, such that now it is actually the the public servants who are principals, you know, and treating the public almost with disdain. Exactly. In the sense particularly of focusing more on their own selfish, personal, and other interests. And that, I think that was the starting point of the book, that showed that really this is the challenge in terms of implementing public policy in Nigeria.
And the first chapter of the book, you know, written by Andrew Nevin, you know, who used to be with PricewaterhouseCoopers in Nigeria, but is now in the States, tries to unpack this whole conversation around principal agent challenges in Nigeria, the social contract or absence thereof. In fact, the way he defines it is the people do not pay their taxes, so they make no demands on the government. And the government feels that it doesn't owe the people anything because they don't pay taxes. So is this the country we have consciously designed? And if it is, isn't it that Nigeria is working as designed?
Well, I think I wouldn't say we've consciously designed. Unfortunately, I would rather say we've unconsciously designed.
Okay.
It took quite some time. There was a time when I was younger, when I was going to school, when things actually worked. People paid taxes, you know, in all parts of the country, particularly under regional governments. It was the taxes of the people of Kano, for example, that financed my education, right from primary school up to PhD level. You know, I had Kano State Government Scholarship. My parents and those of us, we were also sponsored by the government in school. But no matter what, your parents still paid something. And the taxes were graduated according to ability to pay, you know, with a basic rate that every citizen had to pay. Jungle taxes, Jangali, which is the cattle taxes and so on that people paid. So so unfortunately, I think what made us lose direction is really what is being called the
Resource cost?
Natural resource curse.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the chapters covered that adequately.
Mm-hmm.
You talked of very different theories of development. You forgot to mention the natural resource curse. And
Exactly.
I think that's what made us, I would say, in fact, we were sort of, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost, when you are taking a sedative, we were
Yeah.
sedated by the natural resource curse
Mm-hmm.
into really not developing the way we should have developed. If we had continued as we were going after the first and second republics, Nigeria would have been a different country by now.
Okay, so help me understand this, because if anyone should understand this, it's you. You've been there, two-time minister, deputy governor, central bank, CEO of a bank. So you've had a ringside seat, if not even an active involvement in this. For years, we've been saying we've got a resource cost. For years, we've been saying we need to pay taxes, we need to make demands on government, we need to hold government accountable. Why is it near impossible to do these basic things, especially if the agents in this case, the people in government, realize that if they get more taxes, it's more money to do more things, and you can become near immortal, for delivering these public goods to a people who are really not asking for much. What is it that makes it difficult for us to do the basic minimum?
I think, which is the theme of the book, is this agent interest,
Okay.
that really has prevented us from doing things properly. Because you see, you have to also look at the other side. I think one of the issues currently with the current government is people are saying you're concentrating so much on taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you need to tax the citizen to raise the revenue. But what services are being provided to the ordinary citizen?
Mm-hmm.
At what cost?
Mm-hmm.
What are consequences for not providing those services?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, not much attention is being paid to this. For example, when you go as Minister of Finance, everybody is focusing on the expenditure side of the budget. What am I going to get, whether it's a minister or particularly National Assembly members? In a section of the book, I gave a lot of detail about my struggle with particularly members of the National Assembly to understand what a budget should be and all the issues of constituency projects, budget padding. So those are the things that consume a lot of our time and attention. And because of a lot of selfish personal interests, sometimes sectional, sometimes, ignorant attention to things that don't really matter. I think those are the things that have made it very difficult to get things right in this country.
Okay, so as I read the book and the discussions around agent interest, it appeared to me that it's really narrowly defined around self-interest. So if you think of agent interest, it's the guy is thinking about their pockets and so on. And it seemed to me like we didn't focus enough on the institution within which that person operates. So sometimes it's not just about their personal interest, it is what society also demands or expects from them. You have ministers who are appointed, and society expects them to behave in a particular way. You talked about it in the book, where in going through the National Assembly approval, one of the conditions was that you had to be a member of a political party, and that then moved you from being a pure technocrat to being a party member. And once you made that shift, the demands of a politician, came to the fore. How do you see that? It's not just the personal interest, but also the system that we operate in and that we've also developed or designed.
Certainly, one of the explanations for development, again, you mentioned earlier, is the issue of institutions. whether they are there, and even if they are there, are they functioning very well? And towards the end of the book, I actually zoned in, if you remember, if you recall, on particularly the political system. You know, clearly we have not gotten it right. And right now, things are set up in such a way that if you really want to join the political system, by the time you even get there, you are almost compromised, you know, such that it's very, very difficult thereafter to now want to do things properly. But for me, I think, yes, institutions are important, but again, they start again from this individual issue. And the beauty of defining it that way in terms of agent interest is that all these other developmental challenges can, as you see, we covered them, but with a slightly different focus. There are people who will say, oh, the problem of Nigeria is corruption. Yes, it is. But what it is that leads to that corruption, what is it that encourages that corruption, is this agent interest. And you see, with that, even though it looks like a narrow definition, you can then make people realize that corruption is a much wider thing. And many of us are involved in it without even knowing, you know, because as long as you accept that, you know, when it comes to you, certain exceptions will be done. When your child needs to sit down and take an examination, you know, and pass and do well, but you are willing as a parent to go and sit for the exam for them, or to pay somebody, you
Special
know,
status, yeah,
to take the exam for them so as to get a good result, then you are also really a party. And one of the things, again, we emphasize in the book is lack of consequences.
Exactly.
You know, we have developed this system whereby now almost everything is possible, you know, because there are no consequences. And unfortunately, again, you can bring in the issue of leadership, because at the end of the day, that's where the largest blame is. People, and that is why you recall that during my service as Minister of National Planning, I initiated the performance contract, performance measurement of ministers, such that we sat down individually. I sat down as minister with each minister, agreed a number of key performance indicators by which the performance of a minister, of that particular minister, will be assessed. And we drew up a performance contract with those KPIs that were signed between the president and each minister. The thing was, initially, of course, the ministers were all concerned. Who is this guy? Who does he think he is to be the one who is going to assess? But luckily, I had the support of President Jonathan, because, and then this is the issue of leadership. You know, after some time, every quarter, a number of ministers will make a presentation to show how much progress they are making. And you found that, in fact, initially they were all either afraid or suspicious. But as they started making presentations, not only to the Federal Executive Council, but afterwards they will go and address the press and say, this is what I promised to do for Nigerians. Out of those, I've been able to do so much. I haven't been able to do this because of ABC. Just to give you one example, see what is happening to the power sector now. One of the key performance indicators we put for the Minister of Power was we took statistics of the number of times that the national grid was collapsing. And we said, okay, this is the number now.
Baseline.
Baseline. You must agree as part of your performance contract to bring this to zero within, I think, a period of 18 to 24 months. And because that was being and we said the consequences, which is what he signed with the president. If you don't achieve this target, you will either have to resign or the president will sack you.
Exactly.
So that was the consequence that the Minister of Power had to face.
Mm-hmm. So the question therefore is, not to call him, but the question is, why has it been difficult to sustain that?
Well, changing the government. And again, it's one of the unfortunate situations that we have in Nigeria. Lack of continuity and lack of consistency in policy.
Okay.
If you are looking for two evils that have again regressed the progress in Nigeria, it's those two. Lack of continuity, lack of consistency. As soon as a government changes, or even sometimes a minister, it wasn't, I left the government before it finished in 2015. Again, I've explained largely for political reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
as soon as a minister is changed, some other minister comes, and it needs to take him about 6 months to even understand the foundation that has been laid. And he may not actually have the same perception or the same commitment to continue with those policies. So again, lack of consistency in policy and lack of continuity in person.
Let's use this ministerial performance reviews to really see if we can understand what's going on in the government. So a President Jonathan says he wants to measure his minister's performance, and you come up with a template. There's a back and forth, fighting, blah, blah, but it's adopted. A new administration comes through and it's discontinued. By the way, that new administration is supposed to be an administration that's supposed to do right by the people. Why is it that it couldn't be entrenched in bureaucracy, where the bureaucracy demands that process continues, whether you change government or not? So you can say entrench it in law, etc. But why is it that the bureaucrats are not demanding it? You go back to the agency issue. But why is it also that the people are not demanding that the bureaucrats should demand that from the public officials? I'm trying to see if we can get to the heart of it and then switch to how do we solve for it.
Okay, I think the first issue you raised, which is very relevant, is how do you ingrain those kinds of policies that will ensure progress? And one of the ways to ingrain it is get it passed as a law.
Mm-hmm.
Now, through the work of June 2020, we actually distilled all those things, including this ministerial performance, and drafted some legislation, which I took to the president to approve to the Federal Executive Council, and the president forwarded it to the National Assembly to become law. Again, unfortunately, now we are back to the political system. Exactly. I took it, I tried as best as I could while I was in office to get it passed by the National Assembly. It didn't go beyond first reading. It was first reading sent to the committee, and then the political process takes over. Unfortunately, there are what are called bills that have sponsors that have resources, and bills that don't have resources to support them. As Minister of National Planning, first of all, I didn't have the resources, but even if I had, I'm not the one inclined to give money to anybody to do their job or to do what is expected of them. So unfortunately, the bill languished in the system, and I believe that obviously the National Assembly was changed, and once bills that have not been passed then had to go back start all over. So I don't even know where it is currently in the National Assembly. So one tried to ingrain this not only in terms of practice but in legislation. But again, the system did not support it to become law that quickly.
Okay, so because when we talk about social contract, I'm trying very much that we don't get stuck in this thing that happens in Nigeria where we hang on to something and say, unless this is not done, we can't move forward. So we have those conversations around, oh, unless we change the constitution, we can't move forward. Unless we do a devolution of powers, we can't move forward. And it appears to me that if we're not careful, the conversations around social contract can get stuck in that again. If we don't have a social contract, we can't move forward. When we have something like a performance contract, that we're not able to sustain. So with that as a backdrop, if we look at what's happening currently, it appears to me that we're evolving some kind of a social contract under the Tinubu administration. They've removed the subsidy on fuels. Taxes are increasing on electricity, tax collections, etc. The people are beginning to demand. So what Andrew Nevin talked about, where the government does nothing and the people pay nothing, that social contract is changing. The people are beginning to demand. The way we are demanding is we're making a lot of noise on social media. Sometimes it spills over into the streets as protests. Is that how nations develop their social contract? Are we on the right path? Or is there something else the people should be doing or that the government should be doing?
Well, first of all, the social contract you talked about, I think in your earlier communication with me, you said it's not there. I say, no, it's there. It's just broken down. And we can rebuild it. And I agree with you that I'm not one of those also who say, unless you devolve power, unless you go back to the regions of pre-independence and so on. No. You have to actually start with very small steps. It's a question of the steps you are taking and the people that are coming on board. So you are right. I think this government has started rebuilding the social contract. Of course, a lot of attention is on what is expected of the citizen. I think we need to ask more questions about what is expected of the agent, who are the political and other public leaders. What is expected of them? What does the citizen need to expect? So that we need to rebuild this social contract. And institutions, particularly social groups, like Nextier, budget, and so on. In the book, I actually mentioned quite a number of those. And I say that is where I see a beacon of hope. And now the increasing awareness of the citizenry and asking for things to be done, particularly the role of social media. And it's good to see that this government, the Tinubu government, is a listening government. Look at the action immediately. Once there is an uproar and they realize that action is taken, look at the detention and prosecution of these young children.
Yes.
Immediately the president said, look, release them, whatever it is. So you can see, and that is the power of the social media and the power of the citizens. I believe that is what should happen. In the section where I talked about constituency projects and budget padding, it was on in the United States, especially constituency projects. But they were calling it by a different name, But what happened, and it had to be suspended about 10, 15 years ago because of this kind of social mobilization, led to a situation where a senator was even imprisoned for misusing those special allocations. So, in fact, they suspended it for about 10 years, but now it's back, even in the US Congress. But there are restrictions, there are guidelines. You can appeal for special projects in your region or for your community, but there should be no evidence of any personal interest. So, the work of social groups, like Nextier, it's Nextier, isn't it?
Next year, yeah.
I'm pronouncing it the French way, next year. Next year.
Yeah.
Is going to be very critical because unfortunately the people who are supposed to actually come up with the solutions and implement them very quickly are all compromised, most of them. You know, it is those agents turned principals that we're talking about, those who are supposed to make the new legislation and so on. Most of them are involved deeply in the mess that we have currently. So one is not very hopeful that they, being beneficiaries of the system, will come up with the necessary reforms that will reform that system. Because if you reform it, you know, many of the things that they are doing will not be possible.
Exactly.
So it's highly unlikely that they will be able to do it.
Okay, so again, going back to the principal agent theory, one of the challenges is figuring out how to aggregate the interests of the principals, especially in a country like ours, you know, where there are multiple interests, multiple allegiances, etc. But you need to find a way to aggregate this interest and then sieve it through some kind of a national development plan. In your work as Minister for National Planning, you know, you were instrumental in putting together the Nigeria Vision 2020. I think our guest audience will benefit from understanding how that process works. You know, what's the process Nigeria goes through to put together such a plan, especially in a country where there is such paucity of data. Yeah, because if the planning is not done right, then the results may not be realized. So I don't know if you can take a few minutes just to talk us through how such a document is put together.
Well, what inspired me, to be honest with you, was that, first of all, President Obasanjo, and he must be given credit, had actually, unfortunately, very close to the end of his administration, had a presentation was made to him by the people who said that Nigeria was going to be among the next 20 top countries by the year 2025. When they came and made a presentation to President Obasanjo, he, you know, President Obasanjo is somebody who is, things must happen now. Why? He said, why wait till 2025? We should be able to do it by 2020, you know? So that's actually the origin of Nigeria Vision 2020. So when we came in with the Erado administration, as Minister of Finance, I was very busy with the budget and so on. Because there was also a Minister of National Planning who had the responsibility for that. The problem was when we came in, there was what President Erado called the 7-point agenda. So even as Minister of Finance, when I went to him in his study, I said, President, every time in council, I hear people, ministers, saying when they are making presentation, Mr. President, this is in line with your 7-point agenda. I was not part of the campaign because I was not a politician that you brought me in. I don't even know what this 7-point agenda. Can I get a document that tells me that this is the 7-point agenda? He went into a file and brought 2 or 3 sheets. He said, look, this is what I used during the campaign. That is all I have. So you can see the challenge. A lot of governments come in without really a detailed program. You know, I don't know, for example, in the current administration, every minister now, I suspect, that is making presentation in council will start with, Mr. President, this is in line with the New Hope agenda.
Renewed hope.
A renewed hope agenda. And many of them probably don't even know what the renewed hope agenda is, but they think that by saying that, the president is likely to approve whatever they are asking him to approve. So one of the things I did as soon as I was moved to national planning was to say, okay, first of all, Mr. President, let's work on the 7-point agenda itself. Give it, you know, meaning, form, targets, everything. So we worked for months, first of all, to develop it into a medium-term 3 to 4 year development plan. Thereafter, now I had been by that time to meetings of the World Bank, IMF, other international meetings, where I met ministers from India, from China, from Malaysia, Singapore, and so on. And all those countries, at that time, India was also implementing its Vision 2020. Malaysia was implementing its Vision 2020. So I said, okay, let me go back and dig up this initial work that was done by President Obasanjo's government. And really, because what is important is unless you have a longer term plan, which you implement religiously, and that's what those countries did religiously in the last 20, 30 years. All of them stuck to those. Yes, you keep adjusting because circumstances change, but you are guided by a long-term vision. So that's how we set up to work. And I recruited, top-class Nigerians, most of them from the private sector, the public sector. And the work we did really convinced me that a lot of Nigerians are willing to help, even at their own cost. Yeah. For example, when we were setting up the monitoring and evaluation department, we advertised. We recruited over 25 people from the private sector into that department. Most of them with second class, first class degrees and experience working with the World Bank, with and UNDP, and USAID and so on. They were willing to take a cut in pay to come and help the government. Many of them did, So, unfortunately, again, the moment you leave, you probably have, or even now coming back to the point of what led to my leaving the government. Again, I explained it in the book. I don't know whether you've read up to that point. Sure. But again, it's the politics that sometimes trumps the economics. Because one of the key conclusions I came to in the book was to say that when I was in the private sector, especially as MD of the banks, I was part of this Nigerian Economic Summit group. We all believe that, look, let the private sector come together, go and meet the government, become partners, and let's focus on the economy and play down these politics. So we all believed at the time that if you focus on the economy, everything will be all right. My experience in government changed all that. I now believe that unless you get the politics right, nothing will be all right.
And I agree with you. When I read that part, I agree with you. My challenge is that the effort of changing that politics is too much, that I'm still looking for ways we can eke out some progress from the ones within our immediate control, and then hope that by fixing the economy, getting people jobs, getting people richer, then that could change the government. So I agree with you. I'm just looking for another way around it. And if I come back to another issue I've been trying to understand is how can we have good development plans if we don't have access to good data, right? So I suspect that part of the reason why we've not been able to make progress is that the plans we're implementing are just barely better than fiction. I don't know the nature of the data we use in, producing them. We can't test the theories because we don't have data to test the theories. So it's almost like a shot in the dark. If that's the case, are we not just whistling into the wind? Are we ever going to move this thing forward if we don't solve those fundamentals?
Here, I totally disagree with you. Okay. We have made tremendous improvement in our data. Okay. And a lot of that happened during my period as Minister of National Planning because I instigated the appointment of Dr. Emikale as the DG of the National Bureau of Statistics. And he has done an excellent job. Build a foundation that people have continued with. To give you an example, our GDP data, our inflation data, and so on. You people never used to believe in that data. Even the World Bank, central bank that has to use that inflation data. Yes, they developed their own, but now they found, because the central bank also provided especially financial and other support to the National Bureau of Statistics. But I think we have done quite a lot, particularly taking advantage of IT now. To give you an example, when MBS is collecting inflation data, before they used to go to markets, there are about 700 and something markets all over the country. Before we use technology, the person can sit at home and write down prices for you. But now, using satellite technology, you can actually track where any of those agents are all over the country. You can see him in a particular market. If he says in Ariaria market in Aba, he is in that market. But with satellite technology, you can see him or her actually in that market getting the information. So, and then the processing of the data itself, the amount of work that has been done to not just produce GDP statistics, but other elements of poverty, housing poverty, electricity poverty. Look at all of us, even those of us who have generators in the house, who have the money to buy diesel and so on. We're still poor as far as electricity is concerned, because of the bother you have to go through to have power in your house. Exactly. So I now, yes, in some aspects of the data, there is still work to be done. For example, it's so crazy that in this country, we don't even know how many we are. We're still guessing. We don't know where everybody is. Those are, but luckily, what has happened is that over time, data is being collected by the banks, by the police, by immigration, by the national, what do you call it, the national registration system.
Yeah. CSC.
So, what needs to be done now is really integrating that data. And I hear that this government has started some work in that area too. So I don't think data is such it's still not the best, but it's not as you described it. And I think on that basis, we can actually draw up plans, only that they cannot be so long term. But what we did was, when we developed the Vision 2020, we developed a 4-year implementation plan. And the idea is to roll it over every 4 years with new data, with new information, with new targets. But unfortunately, implementation after I left became a problem.
And I like the chapter by, Mrs. Sarah Alade, former deputy governor of the central bank, and how she located fiscal rules or fiscal management rules as the first line of defense against government abuse. And it makes sense. The challenge for me is, how come even the central bank, finds it difficult to implement such rules? And that's why we saw the Ways and Means balloon out of proportion, which also speaks to the fact that the central bank may not be completely independent or autonomous of the political influences within which it works. So With the benefit of many years, that you've been away from government, but obviously engaged in one way or the other, how do you see that we can not just put these rules in place, but ensure that they are implemented as that first line of defense against government abuse?
The rules are there, Patrick. They are there. It's just lack of observation. And that lack of observation is by choice. If you are governor of the central bank today, the law limits the amount of credit that you can give to the government via ways and means. So it depends on the commitment of the particular governor. In the book, I gave one example. During the Obasanjo administration, I was deputy governor at that time in charge of operations. Chief Joseph Sanusi was the governor of the central bank. The government of Obasanjo was winding down, and there were a lot of expenditures that they wanted to do. So we were approaching a point where the government was going to be overdrawn. We looked at it. I raised an alarm with the accountant general, said, look, you are approaching your limit. We then started turning down checks from the government. After some time, somebody reported us to President Obasanjo, and he called the governor. The governor took me in front of Obasanjo and he said, look, you people, what are you doing? I'm getting all these reports about you. The governor said, Mr. President, it's against the law for you to overdraw the account. And the reason we are doing it is to protect you, because if you break the law, it can be an impeachable offense. President Obasanjo, is very intelligent. He piped down after that, said, okay, Governor, what do you propose? How do we address the problem? And we designed a solution for him. Say, look, we will not allow you to go beyond the legal limit. But what you can do is, working with the accountant general, prioritize in terms of what is urgent, what is not so urgent. If there are some requests that are not so urgent, step them down. Step them down, then we address those who are urgent. So that's how, so it depends. And the present central bank governor has also put his feet down the same way. Saying, so really it depends on the governor. Unfortunately, his predecessor, I don't want to talk about any individual, but he probably felt that whatever he thought the president wanted to hear is what he would do. I think that's, so the rules are there. Also, if the National Assembly wants, if a president breaks that listen, they can start action, either in impeachment, something, or a threat of impeachment. So the institutions are there. It just depends on the commitment of those who are heading those institutions to observe the law or not.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask a question around how we manage donor aid that comes to Nigeria, but I want to preface that question by asking where you stand philosophically on aid. There's this argument, aid is good, aid is bad. Just where do you stand in that continuum on the debate?
I'm glad you asked this, Patrick, that philosophical position. For me, maybe because I went to the Ministry of National Planning is the one, now Budget and National Planning, is the one that supervises all the development agencies that work in Nigeria. So for me, having gone from finance to national planning, and now I was heading that responsibility. My attitude, which has remained my attitude till today, is look, every additional dollar that we can get counts.
Okay.
I'm not going to sit down on just some flimsy issues. If I can get anybody that is ready to bring in those dollars and put them to some use in Nigeria, that will help develop people, develop, certain parts of the country, good, all well and good. whatever it is, let it come in. The challenge I had was when I took over, I discovered that those development agencies were running all over the country in a very uncoordinated manner. You know, ideally, whatever they are doing should be in line with our own plans.
Yep.
But their excuse, again, they had an excuse. Because when I confronted them, I got them all together in a room. I said, look, some of you are even duplicating. Some of you are in Borno addressing Boko Haram, and some are in education, some are in health, but you are duplicating. You don't even know what the other party is doing. Sometimes you are in the same state doing similar things. There is no good coordination. So we have to, and you must do this thing in line with our own development plan. Luckily, at that time, we had the Vision 2020. Because when they said, but we don't have, I said, there is the Vision 2020. That's our medium-term plan. So whatever you are doing should be in line with our development plan.
And is there any penalty for when they don't stick to the plan?
Well, you can't really penalize, but they were very ready to cooperate. We actually started a process whereby we were having quarterly meetings with all of them to review what everybody was doing. Because until then, they didn't even know what the World Bank didn't know what USAID was doing, didn't know what DFID of the UK was doing, But by that, bringing them together, we began to actually we had a forum whereby this one would say, we are in Maiduguri doing this and that. We are in Aba, we are in Sokoto, and so on and so forth. And so there was a learning thing, and there was better coordination. Because sometimes before they even came to me, they would have their own meeting, to put heads together and say, look, this is the agenda, and so on and so forth. So we started bringing them together and you see, coming back to the other philosophical point you raised earlier, aid as a proportion of Nigeria's either GDP or the budget is so small, and some people would say insignificant. That's true. There are some countries where foreign aid...
Relative to other countries, yes.
Exactly, relative even to many developing countries, So that is why a lot of people don't pay attention. But as I said, my attitude was any additional amount that we can get, we need to ensure that we use it properly.
Okay. So I have another question, but just to say to the audience, if you've got any thoughts or comments, questions, please put it in the Q&A tab, and we will read them all from there and obviously, properly acknowledge who it's from. But, Dr. Umsan, there's the argument that aid tends to infantilize people, so you become so dependent. It stops you from doing the things you should have done for yourself. You don't build the competence required to just look at your problem square in the eyes and deal with it. What's your response to that argument?
I think, for me, because aid as a percentage of our budget in Nigeria is so small. I mean, less than, I've forgotten the figure, but you're talking about, say, 1 to 3%, or, is that low? I think that dependency syndrome is not really a problem for us. No government, whether federal or state, relies exclusively or heavily on aid for its budget. Usually, in fact, for some governments don't even acknowledge it as part of the budget. And even in the federal budget, usually I don't think it's just a small 1 or 2 line items that is put there. So I think we really don't have that risk of the dependency problem. And again, as I said, some of the aid, if it is properly structured and monitored, can be quite useful. That has been my experience with that.
Okay, so I have a question here from Engineer Omar Bindri. He says, how come the government in Nigeria, and I guess he's talking about both the federal and the state governments, find it very difficult to effectively utilize the vast academic resources we have, over 250 universities, hundreds of technical institutions, including mono and polytechnics, colleges of education, specialized research institutes, to engender knowledge-driven policymaking and governance. The utilization of this resource is very minimal, if at all. Is this a factual statement? When you were in the Ministry of National Planning, if yes, why is that the case and how can it be addressed?
Omar Bindiri is somebody that I have the greatest respect for. He's an intellectual by himself and he's also contributed greatly. And he's still contributing to governance. And the more of his type that we can have come into government, I think the better. Now, exactly. We don't have a systemic or systematic way of attracting people into the public sector in particular. What I did, perhaps because of my background earlier in academics, because I started as a university lecturer before I went into the banking industry, I realized that we have those resources that Umar Bindiri is talking about. And in doing the work of the Vision 2020, for example, and subsequently we did the 30-year National Integrated Master Plan. I invited resources from the private sector, from academia. On the vision itself, we use over 1,000 Nigerians who are outside government with various expertise that they had. And that's when I discovered that people are willing, Nigerians who have expertise are willing to provide support to government ministers if they ask for it, to the government, anything that the government is doing. Just go through a very proper process of identifying the right caliber of people you want. Approach them. You will find that many of the people that worked with us on the vision and on the infrastructure master plan and other engagement that I did as Minister of Nature, they paid for themselves. We were not even paying them. I couldn't afford many of them. It's like you, Patrick, now. If I invited you into a committee of government, or if any minister invited you, I'm sure they can't afford to pay your normal rate.
By the way, sir, you actually invited me when you were minister to work on the National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan.
Exactly.
And that was where I met Engineer Bindri for the first time. And yes, we were not paid anything.
Exactly. So you can see, you participated in that voluntarily. You are not paid. You paid your way to come to Abuja for meetings and so on. And that's what most people did. So we have not systematized it. And I think we should. Look at America, particularly. People move in and out from academia into practice and back. And when they get back into academia, they will find that they even are better teachers because they are not only talking theory, they are talking practice. Exactly. For many years that I was, particularly when I was in the banking industry, I was also teaching part-time in several universities. I taught in University of Jos, Bayero University, Enugu State University of Science and Technology. I mean, part-time. But my students found my classes, this is what they told me, much more interesting because I was not only talking theory, I was also using examples, lifetime experience examples that I've had. Exactly. So yes, Umar, I think it's very important that we need to develop, maybe I don't know whose responsibility it is, maybe the Minister of Education,
National Planning.
Because or maybe National Planning, you're right, I think it's better because it's not just the universities. You are talking of people that are in the private sector that have the expertise, and many of them, I would say most of them, in my experience, both as Minister of Finance and Minister of National Planning, because I set up committees too. The committee I set up to review waivers and tax exemptions was chaired by Senator Udoma at that time, with most people coming from outside government, and we didn't pay them anything,
Sure.
There's nobody in my experience that have asked, come and assist, that has said, no, I'm not going to do it.
Exactly. I have another question here from Pius Okigbo Jr. He says that the National Bureau of Statistics suffers from poor quality data. I know this for a fact, having worked on a pilot analytics project for ERGP on 2 sectors. So he says his question is, how do you get access to quality data for planning and policy formulation? And how did you plan for the continuation of getting quality data?
Well, it's been quite some time, to be honest with you, that I left national planning, and therefore one of the parastatals of national planning is the National Bureau of Statistics. But I know the amount of work that I did together with the DG at the time, Dr. Yemikale, to improve the quality of that data. Part of the challenge also, and this is where, again, the role of the development agencies comes in. The way the national planning used to be supported was that the World Bank needs some good data in terms of GDP and so on of Nigeria. So they would provide technical support to the National Bureau of Statistics. It may be USAID. They need to send some report to their head office, and the data is not of good quality. They provide technical support. One of the key problems was really lack of adequate funding for the Bureau itself. When I was both in finance and national planning, we tried to take care of it. Are they getting enough funding? Because collecting of data is very expensive. That's another problem. Countries that know the value of data really invest in getting that data. You can't just sit in the office and get the right quality of data. So clearly one of the, I don't know, I haven't checked really how they are doing now in terms of getting support, especially funding support. But Pius Okigbo Jr., I maybe let's Patrick will give you my number. Let me take this on a bilateral level with you.
Yeah, excellent. And I have another question from Mudiaga Aluya, and I think it's a very interesting question. He says, now that we've established that there's a failure of the principal-agent relationship, can it be reversed? And are there some insights from your work in government that we can leverage to see how to fix our broken principal-agent relationship?
A very good question, like you said, and a tough one. Because I tried to answer this question in the concluding part of the book. And in fact, in my earlier comment, I have also, in fact, tried to answer it, maybe not so directly. Looking at the people who have the responsibility now to change the system, it's almost, you almost come to the conclusion that it's very, very difficult. Because like I said, who are those who are running the system currently are the greatest beneficiaries of the fact that the system is dysfunctional. So they have no incentive to reform it. And if the electorate were able to punish a member of the House of Assembly at state level or the National Assembly for not doing his work properly by not re-electing him, or her back to the assembly, perhaps you could say the ordinary citizens can have. But we all know what the political system is like. What leverage does the ordinary voter have in terms of the political process? Unfortunately, we know all the weaknesses of that system. So for me, I only came to the conclusion that one hope is incrementalism. The more that a few of us do things properly, hopefully you build some momentum. The second is we keep coming back to the social media and the new generation. Though I don't know whether you can vouch for the younger generations, sometimes when they do things, you begin to wonder, is there hope in this new generation? In other countries also, that problem has been solved by what is called the elite consensus, you know? But you look at the Nigerian elite, unfortunately, many of us are part of the problem, you know? In fact, I would say the elite is more of the problem because at the local level, you go to Enugu, you go to Kano, you go to Lagos, you find a Yoruba man, an Igbo man, a Hausa man, a Fulani man that are at that level of poverty. They are all living together, working together, selling things in the market. And even when they joke about tribe, it is light-hearted joke. It is at the elite level that we take those things and go to market, you know? Oh, they didn't do this to this person because he's Igbo. But when you dig deep down, he's looking for an advantage for himself, you know, rather than, again, doing it for the public interest. So we have actually, one of the theories is most of those countries that have gotten over their problems first achieve consensus among the elite that things have gone so bad and we have to rise and come together and make sure that we don't allow them to get any worse. I hope what we are going through to this time may serve as that basis for elite consensus. But again, one is not very hopeful.
Excellent. Thank you. I have a longish question here. You know, there's a context to it and then the questions. It's from Valentine Achum. You know, he says his favorite teacher, Professor Celestine Bassi, mentioned that public policies are not made from situational vacuum, but from tiny parts of powerful and normative constraints. For him, these constraints, be it normative or non-normative, are ubiquitous and present in every clime, whether developed or developing. His questions, therefore, are: one, how do developing countries manage to record appreciable degrees of success, both in terms of policy design and execution? And then two, since public policy has to do with what government chooses to do or not to do, what is in it that the Nigeria policy ecosystem that makes it so difficult to effectively design and implement policies like their successful counterparts do in developed countries? That's a longish one.
Yes. Let me take the first one and say that I think from my experience, when you look at the countries that have succeeded, and there are many from whom we can actually get some experience. I spent considerable amount of time, for example, in India, in Bangladesh, in Malaysia, with the ministers of national planning. In fact, it led to, at that time, my signing a memorandum of understanding between Nigeria and India, because I realized that we have more to learn from the experiences of those countries. than, say, from the experience of the US or UK or other European countries. And what those countries, I think for me, really the most critical aspect is leadership. Leadership. Getting a leader that says at a certain point in time, okay, this is it. Things have gone so bad that we have to change. You know, and once you have that inspirational leader that also is allowed enough time to implement the changes that are necessary, then you begin to achieve success, and you find that success breeds success. So that over time, as things begin to improve. I mean, look at, I just came back from a couple of conferences in Brazil. Brazil is a fantastic example of how a country can change itself. There was a time when everybody wrote off Brazil. You know, of course, the people talked about them as samba, their music and their dance, but politically very insecure, very uncertain. They had a leadership that came on board, and for a period of 10 to 15 years, began to implement the necessary changes that are needed. So for me, yes, institutions are important and so on, but really leadership that has a long-term vision and has the necessary support in terms of the people that he chooses to or she chooses to implement the plan. So that's I think the
That's actually a good segue to the next question I have from Kazim Lamid. And he says, the current government said it has made all the ministers to sign performance contracts with deliverable targets. We were told it even formed the basis for the recent cabinet reshuffling. But it is very important for governments to make public the performance contract signed by all the ministers to enable the citizens, the principals, to track progress and how the ministers are meeting their set targets. The question I shaped from here is, as the person who introduced these ministerial performance contracts, what were some of the pushbacks that you got from the ministers at the time? And what are some of your lessons from that experience that can help the current administration in pushing through this type of system and making it public to Nigerians?
Well, first of all, I agree with Lami. I think you said his or her. Kazim, okay. I agree with them that these things need to be made public, because that's the only way. People need to know first of all, what are the performance indicators that each minister is being held to by the president. And the ministers also, when they report to council, to the Federal Executive Council, thereafter should come and address the press and tell Nigerians what they've been able to achieve and what they've not been able to achieve. My experience in getting that process started, initially, like I said at one point, it was suspicion from my colleagues, ministers. Where is he going? You know, what does he mean by this? A few of them actually felt so strong-headed that they refused to even come and sit with my team, because we had a process where each minister would come with his team and we sat in the National Planning Commission and go through and agree between the two of us before I submitted to the president for each particular minister. So at the beginning, there was resistance, there was suspicion, but 3-4 months into the scheme, we saw how well it was working. And they were actually, I mean, initially to get guinea pigs who was going to start first, who was going to be the first one to come to the Federal Executive Council. People were dodging. But by the time we did 3 or 4 ministers, the ministers themselves started coming to say, look, I'm ready. When can you slate me for my next presentation? And they will gladly go and address the press after the Federal Executive Council and say, this is how I have performed. You know, of course, they were still suspicious because my own presentation came towards the end. I deliberately placed it until virtually everybody had presented. So when it was my turn now to come, because I also signed performance contract with the president myself in terms of my own key performance indicators. So when it was my turn to present at the Federal Executive Council, you could see everybody was say, aha, let's wait and hear, you know, what he's going to say and how he's going to score himself. Because we used to also, allot scores at the end of the presentation, you know. So they were all waiting. When I didn't give a score, they said, what is your score? And I said, my score, because I'm the one coordinating, is the average of your scores. So the more you do better, that's the only way my own score will go up, you know? So I can never be the best performing minister because mine is just to average your scores. And I think that gave them also confidence that, look, I was not doing this to outshine anybody. But certainly...
Let me ask you a question. Sorry to cut in,
yeah.
but in that performance contract, was there something like a pass mark? You know, I'm trying to picture it in my head. You know, if you made an A, you got something. And if you dropped below a C, you left the cabinet. Was that clear? If it was clear, did you attempt to bring that to the public? Give it to us. Here is what they're working towards. Help us track. And if they don't make it, they leave. Wouldn't that kind of incentive penalty structure incentivize the ministers to do whatever it takes to make sure that they succeed? Because if you fail, it's going to be a very massive public failure, which means probably your political career is over. You know, did you think of doing that? And if yes, what was the pushback and how could we have gotten around it? I'm asking this in the context of the current administration, that maybe is something they might want to try.
Well, I haven't seen the details, to be honest with you, of what is in the current administration's performance. But I think what is commendable is the fact that it is going on. We hope that very soon the public will begin to get a glimpse of the process itself and the performance targets and how ministers. As far as I remember, in the one that we did, probably the only one where there were 1 or 2 where it was so obvious, like I mentioned that of power. You know, with power being so critical to the Nigerian economy, we definitely included that in the contract of the power minister, that if you did not achieve these targets, especially the system collapse, if you didn't achieve them by a certain period, then you either have to resign or the president will sack you. You know, that was made very clear in the contract. But I think for other ministers, it was more, you know, we were just beginning it. Yeah. It was supposed to incentivize people. Obviously, you know, because you are going to come and account to the president in council, you had to make, it was an incentive for people to do well anyway. Mm-hmm. But not only are you accounting to the president in council, but immediately at that meeting, after that meeting, you'll go and make a presentation to the Villa press, which means you are also telling Nigerians, Nigerians that this is what I've been able to achieve. This is, so even that acted as a very, very significant incentive for people to try to achieve those specific targets that were set in their now again, this is where a problem of lack of continuity came in. You know, I think the subsequent government that took over from that of Goodluck Jonathan really didn't give it any serious. I'm happy that the government of President Tinubu has revived it and is clearly working actively on it. I think what I say is the public needs to know a little bit more about the details and what is happening and the assessments that have been done so.
Exactly. And I think a good version 2.0 would be put the contract they've signed in public, make sure that the performance metrics are measurable, use the rest of us to measure how they're performing, and, publicly read their report card and, reward those who've made it and fire those who've not made it. But I have a question here from my colleague, Umar Muhammad. It says that terms like "we need to" can be ambiguous and unending. Where does the socioeconomic and cultural reform that would actually rebalance the socioeconomic contract or the social contract start? And he says, who should be responsible and how should it be done? So instead of the slightly ambiguous we should do, who should do what? How should they do it? When should they start? I don't know if you're able to articulate some of that for us.
Well, it's very clear who should do what. At a national level, it is ultimately the president, because he was elected on the basis of a promise to do certain things for Nigerians. So Nigerians have given him the mandate. In executing that mandate, he has had to appoint quite a number of people. Those are people who will help him execute. So at the national level, it is the president. At the state level, it is the governor. If along the line he needs any piece of legislation that will help him to deliver on the social contract, either new or to be amended or whatever, the National Assembly is there. But you would also think that the National Assembly also, because they are very keen to describe themselves as the representatives of the people, and because of the systems of checks and balances in our federation, the way we have structured it, it's really, again, the responsibility also of the National Assembly or State Assembly to pay attention to some of these things. If this social contract has broken down, how do we revive it? What do we need to put in place to ensure that? And I think the way the president is approaching it, for example, going back to the National Assembly to say, look at these taxes, let's, at least that's side of the social contract of what is expected of the citizen is being looked at actively. But I think the side of also what does the citizen expect of the government, some more attention needs to be paid to that, both by the executive and the National Assembly or the State Assembly, as the case may be.
Exactly.
I'll give you one example where sometimes on a delicate issue, take the budget approval process, because that is one terrible area, one important area where the system seems to have broken down, but a lot of it by this basic personal selfish interest, or what we call agent interest in the book. There was a time when under Obasanjo, under Jonathan, and even under President Buhari, a number of times where the president returned budgets to the National Assembly and refused to sign because of certain things that either had been included that shouldn't be there, or things that needed to be there that were not. I remember during one of those contentious moments during the President Jonathan administration, the disagreement reached a peak where, and that was, I think, the last budget I handled, in 2018 that we reached almost like April and the budget hadn't been signed. So it was agreed that, okay, to resolve these issues once and for all, maybe we now need to go to the legislature to rule on who actually has responsibility to approve the budget, and whether if the president sends a budget to the National Assembly, they have a right to start changing things, putting projects that have not been costed, that have not even been discussed, that have not gone through due process into the budget at that time. Do they have that right? So we mutually agreed. The president agreed with the leadership of the National Assembly that we'll go to the Supreme Court, which is the legislature, for them to decide on this issue, on this constitutional issue. We went to the judiciary and said, we want you to decide on this issue on a friendly basis. Of course, the Chief Justice at the time said, sorry, we are constitutionally set up to arbitrate when there is a dispute. And we can only arbitrate if one person sues the other. So you cannot come to us in peace. So one of you has to sue the other, either the executive to sue the National Assembly or the National Assembly to sue the executive before we can consider such a case. Unfortunately, neither was willing to sue the other, and we lost that opportunity. But ultimately, this issue has to probably be resolved that way. One section of the government has to sue the other for a definite position to be constitutional position to be established.
Sure. We're down to 2 minutes, but I want to get one more question in, and it's from Nkem Moma. And he says, in all of this maze of activities and dysfunction, are there any low-hanging fruits you think you can put forward? Let me append my own question to that to say, knowing what you know of Nigeria, what are the top 3 things that any government that's serious about development must do to get this ball rolling in the right direction? So low-hanging fruits, top 3 things.
For me, I think the low-hanging fruits are power. You have to deal with the power problem, and it's a complicated but a simple problem, both. If a lot of the vested selfish interests are removed, we can resolve this power problem very quickly. A second one is action on resolving the NNPC issue. So the whole oil industry, how does NNPC rise to become the company that the new law promises it to be, so that it's a really global commercial company that, like the Aramcos of this world, is contributing significantly, not only to Nigeria's development, but to the global oil development. A third hanging fruit, low hanging, is agriculture. As I said, I just came back from Brazil, and honestly, I was so impressed but sad about the development that Brazil has been able to achieve. On almost every economic indicator that you care to mention, Brazil is doing extremely well. On agriculture, power, they have more power than their need. And 92% of that power is from renewables. So, I mean, a number of Brazilians were saying, Nigeria, you have no excuse whatsoever. They even say, look, with your geography, with your topography, you are very much similar to what we have in Brazil here. So why are you putting all your eggs, you know, in the petrochemical side when you have all these other resources, water, agriculture? Brazil today is the top exporter of agricultural products in the world. Mm-hmm. And out of the 10 agricultural products, they are number one. Fantastic. I mean, we could be, if we just got it right on those three areas, this country would be a completely different country.
I agree 100% with you. In fact, when we talk about power in Nigeria, it sounds like, you know, maybe getting a man on the moon, but it's not. Electricity came to Lagos in 1896, 14 years after they got electricity in London. You know, so it's not a problem. It's just that we need to deal with the human side of it. But let me give you one last word, Dr. Umsan, before we bring it to a close. Maybe some final thoughts.
Well, I think I am sad but hopeful. You know, I have not written Nigeria off. I believe we have the potential. And I honestly think that very soon, our fortune will begin to turn.
Amen.
Many countries were also written off. Perhaps because I've engaged with many of those countries. India, Bangladesh. I spent quite a bit of time with the Minister of Planning in Bangladesh. Bangladesh was written off also sometime. But see what Bangladesh has become today. Brazil was written off. So we cannot write off Nigeria. And that's for me. And the fact that we are even engaging in this kind of conversation. And I've seen we have close to 68 people that have joined this conversation. For me, I think it's a sign of hope. Exactly. I'm sure everybody that has joined this conversation probably agrees with me that we cannot give up on Nigeria and that it is possible to turn things around.
And I cannot agree more with you. Dr. Umsan, thank you so much for, first of all, for the book, finding time to write it and share this with us, with Nigerians. And secondly, for making time to join this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me also say, for those who are outside the country, the book is on Amazon. So if you want to get a copy, you can do that. For those in the country, Amazon delivery sometimes is difficult, but we are making arrangements. We ran out of the first print. We are making arrangements to print a few more and at least give them to some bookshops so that you are able to gain copy. But if you have access to Amazon, you can actually get a copy now.
Thank you, Dr. Umsan, and thanks for everyone who joined us today. And just to say that in 2 weeks' time, next Wednesday, same time, 3 p.m. West Africa time, it'll be my pleasure to host Professor Richard Joseph, and we'll be talking about prebendalism and a future foretold, reimagining Nigeria. You may know that Professor Richard Joseph is the author of Democracy and Prebendal Politics in Nigeria, one of the most seminal books, very well referenced in this space. So if you can, please join us again in 2 weeks' time, and we'll have Professor Richard Joseph. But for now, Dr. Umsan, thank you so much for making time, and everyone else, have a great day.